This is Loners and Rebels. I'm Heidi, and this is episode 4, William Munroe, the Exile and the Legacy. Some stories begin with voyage, some with a battle. This one begins with a man taken prisoner at Worcester in 1651 and forced across the Atlantic on a ship called the John and Sarah. An exile who lost his homeland, built another, and unknowingly began a line that would put his descendants on Lexington Green more than a century later. Let's start with the first, the Exile. I grew up in a because I said so house. That phrase still makes my skin crawl. No explanation, no discussion, just obedience. And I was never built for obedience. My whole life, I've been the one asking why. The one teachers called difficult, bosses called defiant. But it wasn't defiance, it was survival. I needed to understand the rules before I agreed to follow them. So when I found William Munroe, the William Munroe, my 10th great-grandfather, I recognized that defiance right away. Here was a man who refused obedience too. A soldier who lost a war, got chained and shipped across an ocean for fighting the empire, and still built a life on his own terms. And more than a century later, another William Munroe stood on Lexington Green and did the same thing. That's when it clicked. It's not just my attitude, it's inheritance. That stubborn streak runs straight through my bloodline. My mom's side has the immigration papers. My dad's side has the rebellion. Together, they explain exactly who I am. Then I found this man. Captured in battle, chained, shipped across an ocean, sold into indentured servitude in Massachusetts. What an impossible life and a brutal start. And yet he survived it. I don't compare my life to his, that would feel wrong, but there's a through line. He didn't get to choose his situation, but he chose how to respond. That's something I've been learning too. After years of being a chameleon, tolerating people in situations I never should have. I don't do that anymore. I picture him patient, planning, staying sane by imagining the life he'd build once he was free. That kind of endurance doesn't disappear over generations. Maybe that's what I inherited. Not his suffering, but his refusal to let it define him. He fought in the Battle of Worcester in 1651, the last stand of the Scots against Cromwell. He lost. Thousands were captured. Some dead on the field, some shipped off like cargo. I imagine him, filthy, exhausted, half-starved, shoved aboard the John and Sarah. The John and Sarah wasn't a grand ship, just a small London vessel refitted to haul 272 Scottish prisoners of war. Indentured servants, not free men. They left in late 1651 under the watch of Thomas Kemble of Charlestown, a merchant contracted to sell their labor once they reached New England. Crammed into the dark hold for months, they crossed a winter Atlantic in sickness and despair. And in the ship's records, their identities were barely recorded at all. My ancestor appears only as Munroe, Monrow. The first name torn off, and it might not even have been a surname. It could have been his clan or a guess from an English clerk who didn't care to ask. When the ship finally reached Boston in early 1652, the men were auctioned off, some to sawmills, some to ironworks, their lives traded in exchange for years of work. When they reached Massachusetts, William was sold to a millwright named John Adams, a man who built and repaired the mills that kept the colony alive. Later, he was sold to Joseph Cook, who served as town clerk, commissioner, and deputy to the general court. Oddly enough, Joseph's brother George had fought against William at Worcester. Working under Adams meant long days under a watchful eye. The kind of master who stood close enough to see every mistake and close enough to correct it. Adams controlled William's food, his clothes, his hours, and whether he rested or kept going. It was hard labor, but it was a tradesman's world, physical, immediate, and rough. Cook was a different kind of power entirely. He didn't stand beside William at a mill. He stood above him in every way the colony recognized. A magistrate, a clerk, a man who wrote and enforced the rules that William lived under. One master held his labor, the other held his future, and neither relationship was optional. When William worked under Adams, he hauled timbers, carved gears, dug channels for the water wheel, back-breaking technical work that left splinters deep in his hands. Manual labor, yes, but also the craft of making things move again. Maybe that's where he found his purpose, shaping order out of chaos, wood into motion, ruin into something useful. And when he finally appeared in the Cambridge Town Records in 1657, it wasn't as a soldier or a craftsman. It was a man fined for not having a sufficient ring in the nose of his swine. After everything he'd survived, history's first note about him is a pig. Then freedom. He stayed. He married 3 times and had 10 children. Land of his own in Lexington. William began acquiring small pieces of land in Cambridge Farms, which is present-day Lexington. He and his sons and son-in-law purchased 100 acres in 1695. With increased land holdings came greater status in the community, and he was made a freeman. Chosen as one of the town selectmen and admitted as a member of the church. From prisoner to landowner. I think about that a lot, how you rebuild after someone tries to erase you. How you make peace with the soil that once held you captive. It's not that different from trauma survival, the slow, quiet work of remaking yourself. Fast forward more than a century. Another William Munroe, my cousin, standing guard outside Reverend Jonas Clark's house in Lexington. April 19th, 1775. He isn't just some guy on watch. He's a sergeant in Captain John Parker's militia, the man responsible for keeping John Hancock and Samuel Adams alive that night. And we know exactly what he did because William left his own words behind. In an 1825 deposition, he said that earlier that evening he got word from a local writer that British officers were on the road, some with design upon Hancock and Adams. So he assembled a guard of 8 armed men and positioned them there around Clark's house. This is not a drill. This was protection duty for 2 of the most wanted patriots in Massachusetts. It's sometime after midnight when Paul Revere comes thundering up on horseback, shouting, urgent, absolutely not quiet. Revere arrives around 12:30 a.m. and heads straight for Clark's door. William steps forward and tells him to keep it down. Hancock and Adams are trying to rest. Revere fires back. Noise? You'll have noise enough before long. The regulars are coming out. Hancock, still awake upstairs, hears the whole thing and yells from the window, "Come in, Revere. We're not afraid of you." Tell me that's not legendary. My ancestor literally told Paul Revere to shut the hell up because he was blowing their cover. And this wasn't the end of his night. After escorting Hancock and Adams to safety, William went straight to the Common. By 2 a.m., Parker's militia was forming on the Lexington Green. Parker, a veteran of the French and Indian War, sick with tuberculosis but still commanding, gave the order William would never forget. Stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. Hours later, William stood with his company as British troops marched into town. He was there when the first shots of the revolution shattered the quiet. He wasn't a myth or a symbol. He was a witness, calm, precise, reliable. The man whose testimony decades later still carried the weight of truth. My cousin didn't just watch history happen. He helped light the fuse. I grew up in Massachusetts. I've stood on that green. First when I was 9, then again as an adult. The first time it was just another field trip. The second time, it felt like standing on family ground. I don't recall having so much pride in where I came from until that day. I was lucky enough to connect with Jessie Hilton, the curator at the Lexington History Museums. Her office is literally inside the Munroe Tavern. She's one of those people who doesn't just work in history, she lives in it. Jessie told me about their current exhibition, Swept Up in the Revolution, over at Buckman Tavern. It runs through 2027 and features 8 Munroes who fought on the green that day. One of them, John Munroe, was only 27. The musket he fired, the one that split open when he accidentally double-loaded it, still survives. They also have a pair of breeches that belonged to William Munroe himself, the same ones he supposedly wore when he went to help break up Shays' rebellion. The museum's raising funds to preserve them, which honestly feels poetic. The idea of keeping our ancestors' clothes from falling apart while the country they fought for keeps unraveling. There are others too. Edmund Munroe's letters to his wife before he died at the Battle of Monmouth. George Munroe, who fell beside him but never got a marker. And Abigail Loring Munroe, who struggled to survive after her husband, Jedediah, was killed at Parker's Revenge. Jesse's team is keeping all of them alive, not as myths, but as people. Walking through the Munroe Tavern was incredible. The Historical Society runs it now, but the Munroes kept everything. Relics everywhere. Items from George Washington's dinner there. Paintings, records, and my favorite detail, a musket ball hole in the ceiling from the British assault that William refused to fix. A permanent scar left as proof, maybe bragging rights. If it were me, I'd snicker a little to myself each time I saw it, and I'd whisper a little, "Fuck them." I stared at that ceiling for a long time. It felt symbolic. A family trait, maybe. Don't paint over damage. Remember it. The older I get, the more I see it. This inherited refusal. The exile endured. The militiaman fought. And I've spent years unlearning the art of swallowing my voice. Therapy forced me to look at how many times I'd shapeshifted just to survive. Different jobs, different versions of me. Polite when I was boiling inside. Smiling through misogyny. Keeping quiet through cruelty. I used to think that was professionalism. Turns out it was self-betrayal. It cost me plenty. Walking away from jobs, being a disruptor, refusing to pretend I'm okay with systems built on silence. But every time I leave one of those places or people, I can feel the Williams nodding somewhere. Not the ancestor on a cloud type nod. Just that echo in my blood saying, yep, that's the line you don't cross. Maybe it's their hands in mine, still building something out of the wreckage. The world keeps testing us, seeing how far it can push before we give in. But I've seen what happens when people go along to get along. We call it history. I think that's the gift or curse of this lineage. We don't do quiet compliance. We endure, but we don't obey. Scotland felt like a homecoming I didn't know I was waiting for. We stayed at the gatehouse of Fowles Castle, real Munroe land. I walked through the burial ground, toward the castle with the clan chief's son and his wife, and climbed those hills. Black Rock Gorge nearly finished me. Halfway up, I thought I was going to stroke out, but the view, the sweep of the green, the wind against my face as I stared 120 feet down to the rushing water along the gorge's narrow path, made every gasp worth it. Standing there, I could almost hear them, the two Williams, the exile and the militiaman. Different centuries, same backbone. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the black sheep in my family. I felt like continuity. My mom's side, that's another story. That's radioactive as hell. We'll get into that next time. But my dad, angry, conservative. I think pushing back against the smallness is where my spark really started. I will not shut the fuck up when people are being mistreated. If one person's rights can be taken, anyone's can. Finding these two Williams proved that I'm not too much. I'm just next. The newest version of a line that doesn't kneel. I come from survivors, from fighters, from people who looked power in the eye and said no. I come from the exile who turned chains into legacy. I come from the militiaman who told Paul Revere to keep it down and then stood his ground. And now I come from me, the latest model in a long line of misfits. And that's a little piece of the Munroe chapter. The exile, the legacy, the stubbornness that somehow made it all the way to me. If you want to keep this kind of history alive, literally keep bridges from falling apart and musket ball holes from being painted over, the Lexington History Museums are doing the work. I'll put the link in our credits. and I'll see you next time.